Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to a little poem, Twilight, poem number 49 of the 58 of Stanza 70. Here we're back to Whitman as philosopher, maybe Whitman as priest, and for some readers of Whitman's day, this was one of the most controversial poems of Leaves of Grass, following the orange buds in Florida that we just worked with, and the celebration of America as somehow being more sophisticated than even French culture by virtue of these buds that were sent from Florida. That is controversial enough, but this poem is actually going to be, for many of Whitman's readers, pretty controversial. We'll get into why. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, everything from inscriptions up to and including a set of introductory comments for Stanza 70, and then as we said, we just finished with Orange Buds, and the somewhat controversial set of lines there. Now, our Nortons will tell us about this poem, and there's a bit of good information here, that it was first published in Century 35, another magazine, newspaper, December of 1887, 264. The poet receiving $10. Whitman told Struble, his pal, that he had a number of letters objecting to the word oblivion as inconsistent with his philosophy, the last word of the poem. We'll get to it. He says it this way, quote, this is Whitman now, "But oblivion as I use it there is just the word, both as furnishing sense and rhythm to the idea I had in mind," end quote. Nirvana, obviously nirvana, in fact suggests in Indian Hinduism the emancipation from temporal life in a union with the eternal. We'll think obviously of the Upanishadic tradition in the Bhagavad Gita. And in Buddhism, a spiritual beautification without transmigration of the soul. So let's turn now to this little poem. This is one of the reasons why I say, guys, we have to read these last poems in the cluster that's called the first annex and then later the second annex. Every once in a while, we're going to kick over a stone and find something that's quite remarkable, and a poem like this will do that very thing. Notice Twilight here, used 13 times in Leaves of Grass, but not used in this poem, but rather nicely sets up the two poems ago, Prairie Sunset. The soft, voluptuous opiate shades, the sun just gone, the eager light dispelled. I too will soon be gone, dispelled. A haze, nirvana, rest and night, oblivion. Now, it's clear that as Whitman begins to come closer and closer to his own, as we have said, going to the van, if we're talking about as children, we had to learn this truth that we can't stay at the park and swing forever. We have to go to the van even though we don't want to. The van's always been waiting. You ain't met no 200-year-old people, right? That is to say, sooner or later you got to go to the van. And this is one of the central, I think, motifs of Leaves of Grass. Go back to Song of Myself, passage 6. What is the grass? Well, you know, somehow a symbol of death and yet life. And dying is luckier than anyone supposed. So here we are back to it. Only now, this is a poem written when Whitman is quite old. And so he's beginning to maybe think about the question of afterlife. What happens at death? Notice, he'll begin with the interesting word soft, followed by voluptuous. You'll remember this from Song of Myself 10 as well as Song of Myself 21. He'll use the word opiate. That makes us think, of course, of opium and drugs. That's the only use in all of Leaves of Grass. Then he uses the word shades, which takes us back to Lilac's Last in the Dooryard Bloom 2. And then the sun just gone. This takes us back to a Prairie Sunset with the last words, the silent shadows to the last. The sun just gone. The eager light dispelled. And notice dispelled here a second time. It's the only time in all Leaves of Grass that dispel gets used. And then the dash, which makes us think of Emily. And of course, when we think of a poem like this, we have to think of our Emily Dickinson. No question, right? So here it is, in parenthetics, I too will soon be gone. Now, of course, the I too construction we're all together familiar with. Langston Hughes obviously playing with it himself. We've given full lecture on that at learnstrong.net. But do you remember in As I Pondered in Silence, I too haughty shades, which takes us back to the first line with shades. The continuity of idea in Leaves of Grass is really majestic. I too will soon be gone, dispelled. Just like the sunset, just like the twilight coming on. And then he uses this phrase, a haze, which takes us to out of May's shower selecting. A haze. This word, it makes some sense in this first annex the way he uses it. Not quite clear what's happening. And then He uses nirvana as nirvana. This is the only use of that word in all of Leaves of Grass. Notice he just kind of assumes that his readers will know what we're talking about. Of course, today we kind of know a lot better what he's speaking of, but Whitman's readers, let's be fair, other than, some of those transcendental thinkers like Thoreau and Emerson, there's not a tremendous number of people that even maybe would know what he's talking about with nirvana, and obviously it's going to, lead them to do a bit of research. And then again the dash. Rest and night. I think there's a point to the word rest here. I think Whitman was tired. I mean, as we've commented, being a wound dresser for those years of the war, it destroyed him. It destroyed his health for sure, and I think in other ways it destroyed him. I think there was a lot of energy that he expended that he never knew he could never get back, and so he's almost like he seems to be looking forward to the idea of death being a rest. Night, obviously, is what happens after twilight, that is to say death itself, and then the dash. And then this shocking word, oblivion. You'll remember it from the Navasing 8-poem collection, Last of Ebb. You'll remember that little poem that was within the larger poem that we commented on to oblivion, then exclamation point, right? So where he uses this word again. Again, a number of, especially Christian readers, would have great difficulty with his use of the word oblivion. He liked the word, he said he liked the rhythm of the word, and it spoke directly to what he was talking about. I think it's less clear exactly what Whitman thought about afterlife and eschatology questions. The question of afterlife at 2a then is always going to be challenging, and it was challenging for Whitman in the same way that it would be challenging, for example, later to poets like Yeats and T.S. Eliot, right? You'll remember, Yeats is playing the same kind of game in Sailing to Byzantium, and that final fourth part, we commented on it at Lunchtime, but once out of nature I shall never take my bodily form from any natural thing, but such a form as Grecian goldsmiths make. The question of what happens after one dies. At 2b, I love the word choice of oblivion and the way in which he's challenging, obviously, Christian readers who will believe in heaven about this question of oblivion. Can a Christian believe in oblivion, as, of course, Buddhists and Hindus will, and yet still believe in heaven? I think Whitman is, again, this great integralist thinker. I think he's saying, yeah, probably, you probably can bring the two together, but not telling us exactly how. At 3a, well, obviously the teachings of the Compassionate Buddha can be written here at 3a, comparative texts. Obviously the Bhagavad Gita, no question. Think about Brian's Thanatopsis of 1817. We've given lectures elsewhere and comments there on that one. And then obviously a text that we've referenced a number of times when we talk about death because Whitman was aware of it, was Plato's Phaedo. There Socrates is, in the cell, with his students. They're crying. He's giddy, excited, and there's the hemlock shake ready to be drunk. And they can't understand why he's not like really sad and worried. And he's like, you guys, I've done this thing called this life. Now I'm kind of excited, like the new Odysseus. I'm excited to see where am I going to go to next. It's a compelling, compelling dialogue. Of course, he's going to argue for the existence of soul, which begs the question, can you believe in soul and believe in oblivion? And that leads us finally to 3b. I mean, I love these little poems. Notice, this is a very short poem, and yet it can lead you to have to take a nice long walk in the Badlands to try to figure out what does happen after one dies, and to what degree can I think about that before death? Obviously, Emily Dickinson did a lot of this, thinking about it, and it's not morbid. Oblivion doesn't have to be a morbid term. I think for Whitman, he said it was the right word. What do you think happens, and to what degree is your reading of Leaves of Grass challenging you? I hope that it is. Thank you.